I have a personal question to ask you. Do your flashlights suffer from alien death beams? 29 hertz. You see any flicker? Sort of. You see a band.
On high, this light only exhibits a little bit of flicker to the naked eye unless you move an object very quickly. On low, this lamp, the PWM is very obvious to the naked eye, and of course you can see both of them very well on the video.
The typical zoomie on high.
On high, there is no PWM, and all the flicker you see is due to the camera shutter or the frame rate of the camera.
On medium. On low.
Here is an inexpensive camping lantern I got from Amazon. On high, there is no detectable PWM in the video or in the shutter or in the moving object. When we crank the brightness down to medium, you can see the PWM flicker in the beam, and as you move it in and out, it becomes blatantly obvious. And of course, you can see it in the moving object. On low, once again, it's easy to detect. And in the moving object also. Are video reviews a good indicator whether or not a light exhibits PWM that can be seen with the naked eye? Let's investigate.
Here we're at a 100 hertz PWM, which is the worst I've ever measured in a flashlight. We are at 100% duty cycle, so the light is on constantly. And if you move an object, you can see some flicker in the video frame, which is not reflected in reality. That's due to the camera shutter. Now I'm going to drop the duty cycle. And at a 90% duty cycle, the PWM is obvious. And then as I drop it more, it becomes ferocious. We'll work our way down to 10% duty cycle. Whoops. There. And so now we're at 10% duty cycle. And do you really see a PWM in the video? Perhaps. And yet, it's blatantly obvious. And the camera shutter is interacting with the slow PWM and completely making the moving object break up. And yet, do you really see anything with a still object?
Now we're going to take a look at a light whose frequency is 361 hertz, and we'll start with a very low duty cycle of about 6%. You can see a subtle set of PWM waves interacting with the camera, and it's quite obvious when you wiggle the moving object. Now we're going to increase the duty cycle some, and you can still see the shutter interacting with the PWM of the light, but as it gets larger, the duty cycle that is, the shutter interactions seem to disappear, and you don't see it in real life until you move an object, and then it becomes obvious. Cranking up the duty cycle some more, you see perhaps a very subtle amount of PWM, but up into the 90% range. I don't see it in the camera, and I certainly don't see it in real life. When you move an object, it becomes obvious on the camera if you look closely, and in real life you can detect it, but it's really not terribly bothersome. That's because the off cycle is so slow, is so short. Let's crank up the duty cycle even higher to about 96%. I see nothing on the camera, and you really can't see anything due to the PWM frequency, but you can see the effects of the camera shutter. In real life, it's very subtle. You can just barely make it out. Night core tube, 500 Hertz. You don't see anything in the beam, but when you move an object, it is very obvious there is a PWM. Another way to detect PWM is by using a camera or a video. And this is that same night core tube at 500 Hertz with a short duty cycle. When you look at it, you don't see anything. As I start to move it, you'll see a streak of light. But eventually, if I move it fast enough, you'll see a series of dots. And the streaks of dots are interrupted, and that is the camera shutter interacting with the streak of dots. If I up the brightness, and that on the tube increases the frequency, and I start to move it, you really can't detect a series of dots. If you zoom in on a still picture of this, you will actually see it, and it's interrupted once again by the camera shutter. Let's take a look at a light that's running 1.2 kilohertz or 1200 hertz. There are no alien death beams. You don't see any shutter interaction at all, but when you start to move an object, the PWM is obvious both in the video and in real life, but you don't see it reflected in the beam at all in the background, and so you could easily miss this on a video review.
Here is one of my favorite headlamps that uses a cob LED, and it's running a 1.2K PWM, and on medium it has about a 26% duty cycle, and I can clearly see the shutter PWM interaction in the video. You really don't see anything in the beam, and when the object is still, you really don't see anything. If you move the object, if you can get it going fast enough, you can perceive something in real life, and on the video, of course, you see the interactions. Here is that headlamp again, and now I'm going to ramp the brightness up and down, and you can watch the interactions with the shutter, and you can watch the duty cycle change on the oscilloscope. Here we go. That's the lowest setting. That's the brightest setting. We'll let it calm down. This light is very pleasant to use in real life, and it's one of my favorite headlamps because of the wide spread that it gives with no hot spots. At the higher brightness levels, I don't notice any PWM in real life. Now I'm going to take and ramp the light up and down, but I have locked the exposure, and so the shutter speed is not going to change, and you'll notice a great difference in the PWM interaction with the shutter. Minimum, maximum,
Now let's take a look at a light that's running 3.9K PWM. This is the same frequency as the BLF LT1 lantern, and I'm going to change the settings on the oscilloscope so that you can see the waveform better. Unfortunately, something keeps shaking loose and the waveforms get hokey. This is about a 10% PWM. You see nothing as far as alien death beams in the video, and you really can't see anything in real life when you're waving the light around, perhaps just barely. Now let's drop the duty cycle way down, because that's what the LT1 runs, and even though the scope kind of goes nuts, I'm going to keep dropping it, and I think I'm at about 5% now. Don't see it on the video and really can't see it in real life. Now I'm down to like a 1% PWM, duty cycle. I don't see it on the video, and I can perhaps see it in real life. It's not bothersome, but I believe I can see it. So, in conclusion, can you count on a video review to reveal PWM artifacts in a light being tested? I believe the answer is no, and vice versa. You can often see PWM artifacts in a video that may not be reflected in real life. Draw your own conclusions. I'll have another video up later with a better set of moving objects to test this. Thank you for watching.